The instant the crimson wine impacted my face, time decelerated. I sensed the liquid permeating my dress, its warmth and stickiness uncomfortable. The aroma of mature berries and alcohol permeated my senses. Around the dinner table, gasps reverberated like faraway thunder, yet nobody stirred. Nobody uttered a sound. And subsequently, the laughter emerged. His laughter. "Why do you perpetually behave in such a foolish manner?" My husband, Daniel, questioned with a smirk, swirling the leftover wine in his glass as if he had just imparted the night's best joke. His companions chuckled uneasily, exchanging glances, uncertain whether to partake or avert their gazes. I swallowed with difficulty, my cheeks aflame, not merely from the wine, but also from the disgrace. This was intended to be an informal dinner with Daniel's acquaintances, an occasion where I played the role of the supportive spouse, the individual who smiled appropriately and laughed at the correct witticisms. However, I had transformed into the source of amusement. I sensed their collective gaze upon me, anticipating my response. I inhaled deeply, cleansed my face with a napkin, and rose, slowly, deliberately, elegantly. "Excuse me," I stated simply, my voice unwavering, betraying nothing. Subsequently, I pivoted and departed, disregarding the whispers that followed. Internally, my heart palpitated, my hands quivered, yet I refused to grant him the gratification of witnessing my collapse. I exited the restaurant and drove home alone. Daniel did not pursue me. He was preoccupied with basking in his moment, portraying the amiable host, deflecting his friend's awkward glances with another jest. This was not the first instance of public humiliation. It had commenced subtly, disparaging my ideas during discussions, making sardonic remarks about my avocation when I discussed my photography enterprise. However, recently, the remarks had become more vitriolic, more cutting, and now this, a public display. Nevertheless, as I sat in the tranquility of our dimly illuminated kitchen, I posed the perennial question: was it truly that egregious? I detested that facet of myself, the one that perpetually sought to rationalize his conduct, the one that convinced myself he did not intend it, that he was merely stressed, that perhaps I had embarrassed him. However, tonight felt distinct. Tonight, something within me altered. I was not enraged, not presently. The fury would arrive later. What I sensed now was something far more perilous: lucidity. I detected the front door opening just past midnight. Daniel's footsteps resonated down the corridor, unhurried and nonchalant. I envisioned him, tie loosened, still reveling in the evening's glow, anticipating finding me sullen, perhaps even weeping, so he could envelop me in his embrace and utter something dismissive. "You know I was merely jesting, darling. Don't be so sensitive. You embarrassed yourself more by overreacting." I had heard it all previously. However, tonight, there would be no dispute, no supplication for an apology he would not proffer, no further opportunities. He entered the kitchen and observed me seated at the table, my laptop open, a pen in my grasp, jotting something down in my notebook. His grin waned. "What are you undertaking?" he inquired. I looked up, my expression composed. "Composing a list," I responded. His eyebrows furrowed. "A list of what?" I shut the notebook gently. "Of every transgression you've committed against me." He scoffed, an apprehensive chuckle, his vocal confidence diminishing. "Oh, come now, Emma, don't be melodramatic." I did not reply. Instead, I reached for my phone and accessed a video. I rotated the screen towards him. It was the dinner party. Someone had recorded it, and now, so had I. Daniel's smirk twitched as he fixated on the phone screen, the faint luminescence reflecting off his countenance. His hand clenched around the counter's edge, his self-assured posture abruptly faltering. "What is this?" he inquired, his voice more subdued. "Precisely what it appears to be." On the screen, the video unfolded, his voice distinct, his laughter incisive, the splash of crimson wine staining my dress, the manner in which I had simply wiped my face and departed, and his friends' reactions, some amused, others visibly perturbed. Someone recorded it? His voice conveyed a blend of astonishment and vexation. Indeed, and they transmitted it to me, I affirmed, locking eyes with him. They believed I should possess a copy. I perceived the flicker of apprehension behind his discomfiture. Daniel was an individual who flourished on his standing. He had constructed his career on allure, on being the individual others enjoyed. He was not the most intelligent or the most diligent, but he was the one people desired to accompany for drinks, the one who delivered witticisms at the opportune moments. However, this was different. "Delete it," he commanded, his voice becoming resolute. "Immediately." I cocked my head. "Why? It's merely a jest, is it not?" His jaw stiffened. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "You're exaggerating, Emma. Nobody is concerned about trivial matters such as this." "It was merely a jest," I concluded for him. "Inform me, Daniel, if I had perpetrated the same act upon you, would it remain humorous?" His lips compressed into a slender line. "Naturally not." If the circumstances had been reversed, if I had disgraced him before my companions, hurled a beverage in his face, and derided his expense, he would have stormed out. He would have labeled me unstable, mortifying, preposterous. However, Daniel had expended years persuading me that his utterances were invariably mere jests, while my emotions were overblown. Not anymore. "Emma, please," he implored, a forced chuckle escaping his lips, but I observed the fissures forming in his facade. "What are you endeavoring to accomplish here? Punish me? You're being absurd." I rose slowly, retrieving my notebook and perusing the pages. "Do you comprehend what this represents?" I inquired, tapping my fingers against the time-worn paper. Daniel derided. "A chronicle of every instance I've irritated you?" "Close," I retorted. "It's a record of every affront, every falsehood, every occasion you've diminished me." I maintained his gaze. "I've been keeping track, Daniel, and remarkably, there's a discernible pattern." His expression oscillated between bemusement and exasperation. "You must cease viewing those overwrought self-help videos, Emma. This is preposterous." "Is it?" I inquired, advancing closer. "Because it wasn't preposterous when I sat placidly and permitted you to treat me as an accessory to your existence. It wasn't preposterous when you caused me to feel as though I was fortunate to have you, rather than the converse." I witnessed it then, the moment it genuinely impacted him. I was not merely aggrieved, I was finished. Daniel exhaled, shaking his head. "All right, you're incensed. I comprehend. So, what now? You brandish this video over my head indefinitely?" I started. "You haven't actually expressed remorse yet." "Good heavens, Emma. Fine, I'm contrite, all right? I shouldn't have done it. Can we proceed now?" There it was. Not genuine contrition, merely annoyance that I was not dismissing it as I habitually did. "Moving on?" I allowed the words to linger, as though I were evaluating them. Daniel's physique relaxed slightly. "Splendid, that's all I'm requesting." "Oh no," I rectified. "I intended me moving on, not us." His head snapped up. "What?" "I contacted a solicitor today," I divulged, allowing the words to permeate the space between us. He blinked as though I had communicated in an incomprehensible language. "You're not serious." I raised my phone once more, this time displaying a different screen, a roster of legal consultation appointments. "Exceedingly serious." His laughter was vacuous. "You're overreacting, Emma. You're not genuinely going to dissolve our matrimony over this?" "Our matrimony?" I arched an eyebrow. "The one where you publicly denigrate me? The one where you cause me to feel insignificant?" I shook my head. "Daniel, I did not ruin our matrimony. You accomplished that. I merely, at long last, resolved to cease pretending otherwise." Daniel ran a hand over his face, pacing the kitchen. He mumbled something inaudibly before turning back to me. "What do you desire, eh?" His voice sharpened. "Do you desire me to prostrate myself and implore? Is that the objective?" "I desire nothing from you, Daniel," I stated plainly. "That's the crux." He scoffed again, but there was no mirth in it. "You're being melodramatic. You won't genuinely proceed with this." I merely grinned. "Wait and observe." I turned to depart, but before I reached the hallway, I glanced back over my shoulder one final time. "Oh, and Daniel," I added lightly, "I'd deliberate before dismissing this in front of your acquaintances. You never know who else possesses a duplicate of that video." I did not await his rejoinder. For the first time in years, I did not care what he had to articulate. I simply departed. Daniel did not pursue me, not immediately. That was not his modus operandi. He favored triumphing, manipulating, exhausting me with charm, or, if required, with culpability. He was likely convincing himself that I'd regain composure, that I'd awaken in the morning and rue everything. He was mistaken. I scarcely slept that night, but not because I was reevaluating myself. For the first time in years, I sensed something akin to tranquility. My mind remained abuzz, my heart still raw, but beneath it all was lucidity, a serene, steadfast certitude. I was departing from him, and this time I would not permit him to dissuade me. By the time I entered the kitchen the subsequent morning, Daniel was already present, leaning against the counter with a cup of coffee in hand. He regarded me as though he were anticipating something, an apology perhaps, a sign that I was prepared to discuss matters. I offered him nothing. So, he finally spoke, setting his mug down. "You had your little episode. You're feeling improved now?" I inhaled deeply, compelling myself to remain composed. "I'm not having an episode, Daniel." "All right," he scoffed. "You're still adhering to this ludicrous divorce rhetoric, eh?" I turned away from him, opening the cabinet to retrieve my own mug. I was not going to participate in his game. That was what he desired, to transform this into a contest he could win, to provoke me until I erupted so he could contort it into me being the irrational one. When I did not respond, his tone shifted. "Emma, please. We've been wedded for 8 years. You're genuinely going to discard all of that over one asinine night?" I turned to face him, my expression inscrutable. "I'm not discarding anything, Daniel. You did that a considerable time ago. I'm merely, at long last, prepared to concede it." I observed his countenance meticulously, and for the first time I perceived it, the apprehension. It was merely a flicker, swiftly concealed by vexation, but it was present. "You're exaggerating this," he stated, his voice more strident now. "You believe anyone genuinely cares about that video. My acquaintances were deriding Emma. Nobody's perceiving this as gravely as you are." I leaned against the counter, tilting my head. "Are you certain of that?" His smirk wavered. I extracted my phone, scrolling for a moment before holding the screen up to him. "What's this?" he inquired, frowning. "Examine the comments section, Daniel." The video, the one his companion had recorded, had been disseminated in their private group chat, the same one they employed to share sports wagers, inside jokes, and workplace tittle-tattle. Only this time, the messages were not what he anticipated. Man, that was harsh to observe. "Dude, I don't think that was amusing at all. Kind of inappropriate." "Is Emma all right?" Daniel's eyes darted over the screen, his grip on the phone constricting. "Why are you displaying this to me?" he snapped. "Because you appear to believe your acquaintances found it comical. It transpires that not everyone concurs." I could discern the muscles in his jaw clench, his hands forming fists at his sides. Daniel loathed appearing unfavorable. He valued perception more than anything else, about being esteemed, about being venerated. And now, for the first time, he was comprehending that perhaps, just perhaps, individuals were not deriding with him. They were deriding him. "All right, fine," he conceded, his voice subdued. You made your point. You mortified me. Congratulations. Now, expunge the accursed video, Emma. I imbibed a leisurely sip of my coffee, my heartbeat unwavering. No. His countenance darkened. Excuse me? I'm not expunging it, Daniel, and I'm not remaining with you. He emitted a humorless chuckle, shaking his head. You believe you're the sole individual who can engage in machinations? You desire to proceed with this? Fine, but don't assume for a moment I'm merely going to acquiesce and permit you to seize everything. There it was, the genuine Daniel, the charming spouse, the one who cracked witticisms and portrayed the role of the affable fellow. That was merely a facade. Beneath it, he was precisely what I had perpetually dreaded, a man who craved dominance. I constructed this existence too, he continued, advancing closer. You believe you can merely depart and abandon me with nothing? You'd better reconsider, darling. I gazed up at him, refusing to allow him to perceive the flicker of disquiet in my chest. You're correct, Daniel, I stated softly. You did construct this existence, and I trust you savor it, because by the time I'm finished, it's all you'll possess. He frowned. What the devil does that signify? I set my coffee down, retrieved my bag, and proceeded toward the door. Before stepping out, I turned back just long enough to deliver the final stroke. Incidentally, I stated over my shoulder, you might desire to examine your bank account. And then I departed, abandoning him standing there, perplexity and fury etched across his countenance. The initial indication that Daniel was disintegrating arrived a mere 2 hours later. I was seated in a tranquil cafe, sipping a latte, when my phone vibrated on the table. I did not need to observe to know who it was. Daniel. What the devil did you perpetrate? I took my time concluding my sip before unlocking my phone. Daniel? Emma, respond to me presently. I set the phone down and grinned. I was not going to respond, not presently. Allow him to perspire. I already comprehended what he was discovering. Last week, when I initially commenced contemplating departure, I had transferred half of our shared savings into a distinct account under my name. Legally, I was entitled to it. I had earned just as much as he had. The distinction was, I had been astute enough to prepare. I had also eliminated myself as a co-signer on his credit card and congealed our joint account. If he desired funds, he would have to rely on his own. And that was a predicament for Daniel, because Daniel was not adept with his own finances. He resided like a monarch on payday and lamented like a pauper by month's end. Extravagant nights out, exorbitant contraptions, status symbol acquisitions to impress his acquaintances. It had all depleted him more rapidly than he comprehended. Now he had to confront the repercussions. I examined my phone once more. Daniel. You pilfered our funds. Are you demented? Daniel. I vow to God, Emma, rectify this presently. I exhaled slowly, the gratification settling profoundly within my being. It was our funds when I extracted half, but when he squandered thousands on inanities, that was his prerogative. Typical. The subsequent blow impacted more forcefully than the initial. I did not have to tarry long to learn of it. That afternoon, my companion Mia telephoned, her voice practically oscillating through the phone. Emma, kindly inform me you've witnessed it. Witnessed what? I inquired, even though I already possessed a premonition. The post. I accessed the group chat Mia and I shared with a few mutual acquaintances. The instant I perceived the screenshot, my breath hitched. Daniel's superior had posted something, not naming names, but it was patent who it concerned. A man who cannot venerate his spouse in private will not venerate anyone in commerce either. Actions possess repercussions. Daniel's superior had been present at that dinner party, and ostensibly, he had not derided. Comments inundated, subtle yet revealing. Wow, individuals genuinely manifest their authentic colors occasionally. Disgracing your own spouse in public? Yikes! Pleased I comprehend whom not to collaborate with. Daniel had constructed his career on being affable. He was not the most proficient at his vocation, but he knew individuals. He charmed them, induced them to laugh, persuaded them he was the individual to invite for libations after work. However, that allure was now fissuring because when you expose someone for who they genuinely are, the individuals who once venerated them commence perceiving the verity, and Daniel, he was being exposed. I was still perusing the aftermath when my phone rang. Daniel. I allowed it to ring, then a voicemail. I inserted my earbuds and pressed play. Emma, what the hell is transpiring? My superior won't return my calls. Individuals are treating me as though I'm some sort of monstrosity because of you. His voice quivered, fury scarcely contained. This is beyond trivial. This is atrocious. You're ruining my existence over a blasted jest. A pause, then a more subdued, almost despairing. Please, darling, I didn't intend it in that manner. You comprehend that. I shut my eyes. I knew that tone well. The shift from ire to commiseration, from exasperation to guilt-tripping. He was grasping, endeavoring to draw me back into the cycle, but I was not succumbing, not this time. By evening, Daniel had transitioned from demanding to negotiating. I received another message. Daniel, let's converse, just us, no altercations, please. I fixated on the words for a moment before typing back. Me. Fine. Rendezvous with me at the residence in 1 hour. Then, I retrieved my bag and departed. When I arrived, Daniel was already present, pacing. He turned abruptly when I entered. All right, he exhaled. Let's be mature about this. Let's converse like rational beings. I folded my arms. Proceed. Look, I was a jackass. I concede that. He ran a hand through his hair, exasperated. I was inebriated. It was an imbecilic jest, but I didn't intend to wound you. I arched an eyebrow. You weren't inebriated, Daniel. You had half a glass of wine. His jaw twitched. Fine, whatever. The point is, I erred, but you're going thermonuclear here. You're severing the accounts, turning individuals against me. What do you desire? Retribution? I sighed, tilting my head. No, Daniel, I merely desire to be finished. His expression darkened anew. So that's it? You're departing just like that? Just like that. For a moment he appeared forlorn, as though it were only now impacting him that he was not prevailing in this instance. What am I supposed to undertake, Emma? I shrugged. Determine it. You perpetually informed me I was the predicament. Now you get to perceive what existence is like without me. His countenance hardened. You're going to rue this. I grinned faintly. No, Daniel, you are. I turned and proceeded toward the door, sensing the burden of years descend from my shoulders. Before I stepped outside, I articulated one final sentence, not bothering to glance back. Oh, and incidentally, you might desire to examine your email. Then I departed, abandoning Daniel standing alone in the residence he once dominated, with the tempest he never anticipated approaching, about to impact him with full force. What Daniel was not prepared for was what was forthcoming. I could envision it flawlessly, the manner in which his countenance would contort as he accessed his email, perusing the words, rereading them in disbelief, the way he'd rush to his laptop, typing frantically, anticipating that what he was perceiving was not genuine, but it was. By the time I returned to my apartment, the one I had discreetly leased 2 months prior when I initially commenced planning my extrication, my phone was already vibrating. Daniel. I disregarded it. Another call, then another. By the time he left the voicemail, I was already decanting myself a glass of wine, settling into my new existence with a sense of serenity I hadn't sensed in years. But still, I pressed play. Emma, you... His voice fractured with fury. You're out of your blasted mind! What the hell did you perpetrate? I imbibed a leisurely sip of wine. Let's observe how he managed this. The email I had dispatched was not to him. It was to his company's HR department. Attached was the video from the dinner party. A lucid, incontrovertible exhibition of verbal and emotional maltreatment in public, no less. I did not have to articulate much, just a straightforward professional message. I am reaching out to formally report my soon-to-be ex-husband, Daniel Marks, for repeated patterns of verbal and emotional abuse, as demonstrated in the attached footage. This is only one instance, but it reflects an ongoing issue that has impacted both his personal and professional reputation. Given your company's values, I felt it was important that this behavior be acknowledged. I comprehended precisely what I was undertaking. Daniel was employed by a firm that prided itself on corporate ethics and leadership accountability. They hosted workshops on workplace respect, diversity, and inclusion. Their HR department regarded PR scandals exceedingly gravely, and now they possessed substantiation of one of their own employees disgracing his spouse in public. He would not be capable of dissembling his way out of this one. My phone rang once more. This time I answered. Emma. His voice was agitated, divested of the assurance he perpetually conveyed. I remained mute. You dispatched that email? Are you sincere? Do you possess any notion what you've perpetrated? I comprehend precisely what I've perpetrated, I stated composedly. I ensured they perceived you for who you genuinely are. Good God, Emma, this is my vocation. What the hell is amiss with you? I exhaled, reclining in my chair. Oh, now. It matters? Now you're concerned about repercussions? Amusing, because when I was seated there, drenched in wine, hearkening to you deride, you didn't appear excessively apprehensive about my standing. That was distinct. No, I interjected. It wasn't. His breath arrived in incisive and uneven bursts, his vexation scarcely contained. Look, we don't have to proceed in this manner. You're incensed, I comprehend, but we can rectify this. Just inform them it was a misapprehension. Inform them you were exaggerating. We can cause this to dissipate. I almost derided. Even presently, he believed I could be swayed, that I could be governed. You still don't comprehend, do you? I stated softly. I don't desire to rectify this, Daniel. I desire you to sense what it's akin to forfeit everything. Silence, then a hushed, strained whisper. You're genuinely perpetrating this? I already did. The aftermath was expeditious. By the subsequent morning, Daniel's superior had summoned him for an imperative meeting. By the afternoon, he was suspended, pending an internal review, and by week's end, the firm declared his dismissal. He endeavored to contest it, endeavored to contend that it was unjust, that it was a private matter, that his spouse was merely vindictive, but the video articulated more vociferously than his utterances ever could. And it was not merely his occupation he forfeited. His standing disintegrated. Clients withdrew from ventures. Colleagues distanced themselves. Acquaintances ceased returning his calls. It was not merely about the dinner party any longer. Individuals commenced recollecting all the other occurrences, the offhand sexist remarks, the manner in which he perpetually dismissed women in meetings, the microaggressions. His realm was not collapsing. It was disclosing itself for what it perpetually was, and without his authority, his allure, his affiliations, Daniel was naught. A week following his termination, Daniel appeared at my apartment. I almost did not respond, but I desired to observe him, to gaze into his eyes one final time. When I opened the door, I scarcely recognized him. His once immaculate suit was creased, his assurance vanished, supplanted with something vacuous and despairing. Emma, he stated, his voice more subdued now. Can we converse? I scrutinized him for a protracted moment. Converse? I reiterated. Like we perpetually did? Where you articulate, and I sit there and accept it. He emitted a breath, shaking his head. I erred, all right. I comprehend that. But this is excessive. Excessive? I cocked my head. You intend akin to hurling a beverage in my countenance before an assemblage? Akin to deriding me while I sat there, disgraced? Akin to treating me as though I were inferior for years? He swallowed with difficulty. I merely require some time to rectify matters, he murmured. I just. I require your assistance. I almost commiserated with him. Almost. You perpetually required my assistance, Daniel. You merely never desired to concede it. He glanced down, rubbing the back of his neck. I suppose I merely presumed you'd perpetually be present. I exhaled slowly. Indeed, I stated. So did I. I shut the door in his countenance, and this time I did not glance back. The door clicked shut, sealing Daniel out of my existence for good. I leaned against it for a moment, exhaling slowly, allowing the tranquility to settle. No further manipulation, no further psychological games, no further awaiting an apology that would never arrive. For the first time in years, I was liberated, and I had never sensed more buoyant. I did not have to monitor Daniel to comprehend what transpired subsequently. The whispers commenced almost instantaneously. His descent from grace had been public, and the individuals who once venerated him now shunned him. He endeavored to secure another position in the same field, but word had disseminated. His standing was sullied, and in an industry constructed on affiliations, he had incinerated too many bridges. He was not merely out of employment, he was out of influence. The same acquaintances who used to deride at his witticisms abruptly were not returning his calls. His savings, what little remained, were dwindling rapidly. He endeavored to contest the divorce settlement, but with the substantiation I had amassed, his solicitor practically implored him to settle discreetly. He forfeited the residence, he forfeited the esteem of his peers, and ultimately, he forfeited himself. Mia texted me once, stating she had observed him at a tavern, alone, appearing insignificant, appearing inconsequential. I did not reply. I did not need to because I did not care. My existence, conversely, prospered. The apartment I had relocated into was not provisional. It was a new commencement. I adorned it precisely how I desired. Luminous, cordial, no vestiges of Daniel's frigid contemporary aesthetic, and my enterprise thrived. Without Daniel disparaging me, without him inducing me to question my merit, I infused everything into it. I expanded, I employed additional individuals, and for the first time in a considerable duration, I comprehended just how much I had been restraining myself when I was with him. Individuals commenced reaching out, not because of what had transpired with Daniel, but because of what I had perpetrated subsequently. "You're an inspiration," one woman inscribed. "I observed your narrative unfold, and it granted me the fortitude to depart my own venomous matrimony." Others followed, narratives of women who had once sensed ensnared, just as I had, women who had been caused to feel insignificant, just as I had. And that's when I comprehended something. My reprisal hadn't been about annihilating Daniel. It had been about reconstructing myself. 6 months after I shut the door in his countenance, I encountered Daniel once more. It was not premeditated. I was at a networking event, deriding with new business associates, when I espied him across the chamber. He was not attired in the crisp suits he used to don. His tie was slightly slack, his assurance muted, and he was unaccompanied. I did not approach him, I did not need to, but he perceived me, and in that moment, I observed something alter in his expression. Regret, not because he had forfeited me, but because he had never genuinely perceived me until it was excessively belated. For a moment, I almost anticipated him to approach, to endeavor one final time, but he did not because he comprehended I had prevailed. That night, I returned home to my apartment, the one replete with mirth, with cordiality, with serenity. I decanted a glass of wine, sat by the window, and exhaled. This time, I was not submerging in crimson wine and disgrace. I was exulting, not reprisal, not conquest, but emancipation. Daniel had believed that hurling that wine in my countenance was the punchline to some atrocious jest, but he had been mistaken. It was not the conclusion of my narrative. It was merely the inception.